Okay, let's learn.
What?
Kum Lenin, a Blat Gemara. Today's Blat is Daf Mem Vav. We are up to Daf Mem Hey on the base, the very bottom of the page. We had three opinions regarding the Baruch of Lulav and Baruch of Sukkah every single day. We had Shmuel. His opinion was that Lulav you make a bracha every day because it's a new mitzvah, because at night there was a break. But Sukkah you make one bracha in the beginning and it lasts forever. And then we had two views of Rabbi Yechanan. We had one opinion of Rabbi Yechanan where Rabbi Baba Chana said that Sukkah are just opposite of Shmuel. Lulav is only one day because he holds a mitzvah derabban, you don't make a bracha, but Sukkah is daily because it's a mitzvah in the Torah. And then you had Ravin who said Rabbi Yechanan knows that in both instances you make a bracha every single day. Sukkah you make a bracha every single day because it's Mahat Torah. And Lulav you make a bracha every single day because he holds it's a new mitzvah. And even though it's derabban, you still make mitzvahs of under abundance. And Rabbi Yosef says that's how we rule. So Macy, let me ask you a question. It says, if somebody makes a lulav for themselves, you make a bracha, the Yishalmi said there's actually a mitzvah to make the lulav, there's a mitzvah to make the sukkah, and you make a bracha lases. It's a sukkah, and so on. And if you're doing it for yourself, and if you do it for somebody else, say alasias. Our Babli will have a menachas argues, but nevertheless, because it's not the end of a mitzvah, it's only the beginning, so you don't make a bracha when you're just doing the beginning of the mitzvah. And or if a mitzvah can be done, it can be done by a goy, then again you don't make a bracha on it, but you do make a bracha shechiyanu when you build the sukkah or when you make the lulav. If you're doing it for yourself, if you're doing it for somebody else, you don't make the bracha shechiyanu. What about not lulatzes by when you take the lulav to be yaitzer with it? Then you make a bracha asher kedishon mitzvah until it's lulav. And we don't do this today. We'll see in a minute why. So you have two different phases. In the beginning, you make shechiyonu. When you're besimcha, you're now getting involved in the mitzvah, and then by the actual mitzvah, you make the bracha.
Sorry to interrupt. I missed the start. Where are you up to?
Mem Vav Amud Aleph, 3 lines from the top. We're discussing now whether you make a bracha on lulav every day, or you make a bracha on sukkah every day. And we're going to ask we have 3 opinions. We're going to ask now a question on opinion number 2. And so the Braisa says if you make a lulav yourself, you make a shechiyanu, and when you actually pick up the lulav, you say the bracha until it's lulav. The afa pisha beidach olav yom rishon, and even though by lulav you made a bracha the first day, chayzer u'mevarech kol shiva, you make a bracha every single day, which is a question on Rabbi Baba Chana's version of Rabbi Yechanan that a mitzvah the rabbanon you don't make a bracha. Clearly here you do make a bracha every day. That's question number 1, and question number 2 would be the next part. Oisa sukkah, you make a sukkah again. According to the Shalma, you make a bracha lasa sukkah. According to us, even though it's the beginning of the mitzvah, since the mitzvah hasn't been completed, all you do is you make a bracha shechiyonu v'kimono at the time of building the sukkah, as long as it's within 30 days. Nichnis leishaba. The wording here is we spoke yesterday about the machlekes of the Rambam and the Rosh, because the wording is nichnis. As soon as you walk in to sit down, that's why the Rambam says you should make kiddush, you should do everything standing up before you sit down. And the Rosh says if you follow that logic, then you should do it even before you walk into the sukkah, because as soon as you walk in, you're doing the mitzvah sukkah. But rather, leisha means to spend time there. So, and you don't do it standing down. You sit. When you sit down, you're just sitting at the beginning of before you spend the time. So therefore, you make the bracha when you sit down. And it says here, this Braisa says that by sukkah, once you make a bracha the first day, you no longer make a bracha anymore. So again, a question about that sukkah you make a bracha every day because it's not Torah. Here it says you make a bracha only once, which is actually like Shmuel. And by lulav you say you make a bracha only once because the rest of the rabbanon make a bracha. It says you make a bracha every day. Kasha lulav al lulav, kasha sukkah. So we say bishleim lulav al lulav kasha. We don't have a problem lulav al lulav. Why not? Kan bisman shebeis hamikdash kaim. This is the time the base of Mikdash when lulav was a mitzvah of the Torah, so they did it every day in the base of Mikdash. And kan bisman she'ei base of Mikdash kaim. And here it's talking about when there's no base of Mikdash, or actually outside of base of Mikdash in Gevulin, where it's only midrabbanon. So you make a bracha only once. So the Braisa is talking about when lulav was mahat Torah, and Shmuel was and Rabbi Yechanan was talking about when lulav is only midrabbanon. Fine. However. El Sukah Kasha, Sukkah is always Mahat Torah. You said that Sukkah make a bracha every day. The Braisa clearly says make a bracha only once. Says, you're right. Tanoyi, there's an argument Tanoyim. The Tanya we learned tefillin, we're going to compare it to the mitzvah tefillin. by tefillin, kol zman shemanichen, as long as you're wearing tefillin, mevorich alein. Every time you put them on, you make a bracha on a divrei Rebbe. So if you put them on 10 times a day, you make a bracha 10 times a day. And we draw an analogy to sukkah, and that's why by sukkah there are those. I told you yesterday, there are all kinds of opinions. You make a sukkah once a day in the morning, and that's it, or you make a sukkah a bracha every time you walk in, or even if you're sitting in there, if you're doing different activities, or even if you're sitting in there and you ate a meal at the Tazholz, and then you stop, and 2 hours later you're still sitting in the sukkah, you start a new meal, you make another bracha, because every time you put on tefillin, you make a bracha. You only make a bracha once, and so the sukkah as well. Since you only make a bracha once by tefillin, because every day is a new mitzvah, when it comes to sukkah, it's one long mitzvah, 7 days. We had the expression, so therefore you make a bracha the first day of sukkah, and that lasts you the entire time. Itma, we learned, Abaye says, Abaye says, that every time you put on film, you make a bracha. Rava says, and then later he'll change his mind. So therefore, by sukkah, if according to Abaye, which is halacha, by film, you make a bracha every time. So by sukkah also, you make a bracha every single time you walk in the sukkah. And we took it even further, that maybe if you're walking out of the meal, and just to talk to a friend, the Meidi says when you come back in, you have to make a bracha. According to another Rishonim, the Meidi says, doesn't say name them who they are, but he says the others hold that if you walk out to bring more food, when you come back in, you have to make a new bracha, so every time. Amar Rav Mori, brother Bashmul, Rav Mori, the grandson of the daughter of Shmuel. The reason why we give credit to the daughter of Shmuel is because if you remember the Gemara, we'll learn the Gemara Ksuvas about the daughters of Shmuel were kidnapped. And the thing is that when they kidnapped, they cannot trust that anything happened. They came into the Beis HaMedrash and they said, we were kidnapped, but we are Torah. And because they're the ones who Pesha also Pesha Hitik, because they knew how to learn. So we, and then she married one of the kidnappers who was Megayer. So we named her son after her. So Mori, the son, the grandson of Shmuel, Chazina le Rava, the La'avikish Maite. So Rava actually changed his mind. He followed Abaye. How do I see that? Basically, in the morning, first in the morning, he used to go to the bathroom. The nafik he came out. He washed his hands. Put on film. Made bracha then. Obvious. When he had to go to the bathroom again, basically, he had to go get to the bathroom. The nafik, he went out. Moshe washed his hands. Put the film back on again. Made new bracha. So we see every time he put it on, make a bracha. We follow Rebbe. Therefore, by sukkah also we make a bracha every single day. That some people learn because he says every single day, not every time you walk back in. That you make only once in the morning, and for sukkah every morning, and that lasts for a whole day. And then we have all the other opinions. Taisa has a whole discussion here. So when do we say Shechiyanu? How come certain mitzvah you don't say Shechiyanu? He wants to bring one opinion, maybe mitzvah that are simcha you do, a mitzvah that are not simcha you don't. He's not very happy with it, and he brings some other goinim, Shira goin who argues and says something that comes from time to time. So then he asks, how come Pidyon Ben make Shechiyanu? Doesn't come time to time, so they one more thing. And he sort of remains with the tzorichin. What exactly are the rules? The Rambam gives rules, but it's an interesting discussion. When do you make a shechiyanu? When don't you make a shechiyanu?
Gabe talking, we don't talk from the beginning of the end, Kiyas Shoifer, beginning of the Megillah. Why, when we're doing these mitzvahs, like film, for instance, or sukkah, we make a bracha and we perform the mitzvah, but we're allowed to be mafsik with talking?
It's a rush in the beginning of Pesachim. He talks about like you're eating. You make a bracha on food, and then you can talk as much as you want during the meal and continue eating. Because it's considered one long mitzvah, it's not a hefsek. The hefsek is only between the bracha and the beginning of the mitzvah, but it's not a hefsek once the mitzvah starts. By shofar, because the mitzvah is not completed. These mitzvahs you take it full straight away. You finish the mitzvah. You just decided to continue with it. Sittas and all these other mitzvahs. Eating, you decide to continue eating. By shofar, you need a certain amount of kiyas to be yetzer. Therefore, the mitzvah is incomplete until you finish. And therefore, that's why we don't want you to be mafsik. It talks. The reason why he's in Pesachim because he talks about once you start beer chametz, you shouldn't talk until you finish the entire bedikas chametz, because it's all you're not finishing your mitzvah until you complete the entire bedikas chametz. Alma Mazutra said, "Chazinu and a puppy, bisol a puppy, the chol emas the monach tefillin mevorah. Whenever you put on tefillin, make a bracha. Rabbanan ve'Rabashi call emas the mashma mevorah. Every time he touched the tefillin, make a bracha. And because we're comparing Sukkah to Tefillin, the opinions I gave you before, a lot of them revolve around this little piece right here. So what exactly Rabbanan Rav Ashi is saying? Every time you touch the Tefillin, you make a bracha? Is that the pshat? Every time you touch it? And that's what it seems from Rashi. Every time you touch it. Others say that no, Rashi also said you learn from tzitz. And it's all talking about you had a hesed chadas. And then you remind yourself again, that's when you make the bracha, not every time you touch it. And others say every time the tefillin falls out of place, not in the middle of your head or something, falls out of place, and you put it back into the middle, that's when you make a bracha. So depending on how you understand every time you touch the tefillin, you make a bracha, they go back to Sukkah, related back to Sukkah. So when do you make a bracha on Sukkah? You know, every time you walk out, or only when you walk out completely, and you didn't have mind to come back, and then you come back and the same thing here. Right, Abashi learned, called Amos, the Mashma of make a bracha. We're going back to the Gemara we learned before. Mitzvahs lulav. The mitzvah of lulav is called Shiva. All 7 days. Rabbi Shmuel Levi says, so Rabbi Yehuda's name is Shmuel, the mitzvah of lulav is all 7 days, as we had before. We started off this whole Gemara yesterday. That the lulav, every single day you make another bracha, because at night you're interrupted. And if you make a bracha every day, it's only mitzvah rabbanon. He holds mitzvah rabbanon, you make a bracha. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, Yom Rishon is mitzvah lulav, is mahatayra, mikan ve'elech mitzvah keni. From here in, it's a mitzvah of the elders of the rabbanon, and therefore, the way Rashi understands, you don't make a bracha by a mitzvah the rabbanon. So Rabbi Shua ben Levi holds on a mitzvah rabbanon. You don't. Why? Because you cannot say vetzivonu. I mean, Hashem told us. He never told us. Rabbanon told us. You cannot make a bracha. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Kol Yom Mitzvahs Kenim, Afilu Yom Rishon. Every day is Mitzvahs Kenim, even the first day, says the Gemara. What are you talking about? But Kaimel on the Yom Rishon that I said, the first day Lulav is Mahatayra. Amos, so read as if he said, Bar mi Yom Rishon, except the first day. Nu Ihochi Hainu Shmuel Levi. So let's see, what's Rabbi Yitzchak saying different from Shmuel Levi? Amos say, V'chein Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak agrees with Rabbi Shmuel Levi that a mitzvah the Rabbanon, you don't make a bracha. Now the Gemara says, but I'll prove it to you that there are others who hold you do make a bracha with Rabbanon, like Rav. I'll prove it to you. How do you know you make a bracha? Also, all 7 days you make a bracha, even though it's a mitzvah rabbanon. Ashi said in the name of Rav that a madlik ner shel Chanukah. If you light Chanukah candles, you have to make a bracha. The Chanukah candles are only mitzvah rabbanon, and yet you make a bracha. So we see clearly Rav holds that mitzvah rabbanon make a bracha. So obviously, Balul holds the same thing. And now that we're talking about Chanukah, we'll continue a bit further. Here we have a chiddush by Chanukah Lich. You have nothing nowhere else. That if you see Chanukah Lich, tzarich levarach, you have to make a bracha. All other mitzvahs, if you don't have the access to the mitzvah and you see it, you don't make a bracha. Only by Chanukah Lich. Why is Chanukah Lich different? Either because of the wonderful miracle Hashem just demonstrated His love for the Bnei Yisrael. Therefore, we decided to make it special. Also, there are a number of people, some people want to say the reason is because there are a number of people who don't have a house, they have nowhere to light Chanukah Lich, so we want to give them an opportunity so by singing. Taisa doesn't like that answer because if so, what about a mezuzah? You don't have a house, you cannot do mezuzah, so why don't you make a special bracha for singing it? Then Taisa gives an interesting answer that we don't make up new brachas for somebody who's not doing the mitzvah, just seeing it. So what we're doing here is the person who sees it shares one bracha with the person who lights it and drops one bracha. He won't make the bracha lahadlik because he's not lighting, but he'll make the bracha she'asa nisim. But all other mitzvahs, if we want to make a bracha, let's say on tefillin, just seeing someone putting on tefillin, we'll have to create a new bracha that the person who actually wears the tefillin doesn't make it, and we have no right to create new brachas.
Wouldn't you say that by mitzvahs ner Chanukah, the whole kavanas ha-mitzvah is pirsum denissa? So it's dafka when someone else sees it that the whole thing is actually makuyim.
Yeah, but the mitzvah is to do the activity. Where do you find the mitzvah just seeing it? It's a mitzvah to be mafar someone else.
What says pirsum? When someone else sees
there's no mitzvah for me to go find menorahs to stand and look at it. There's no such mitzvah. The mitzvah is to light it, make it possible for others to see it. There's a big machlekes in Shainim when we say haroya. What exactly does it mean? Does it mean somebody who didn't light yet and will not light in the future? That's opinion number one. Only then does he make a bracha. Or is it somebody who didn't light yet, even though he will light in the future? He makes a bracha. Or even if they lit for him in the house, but he didn't light it himself, then he makes a bracha. Or even if he lit it and everything else, he sees now a menorah, he should also make a bracha. Different opinions as to what the roya is. No, is the roya totally a separate mitzvah than the madlik, or is the roya like part of the mitzvah of madlik? So if he's doing madlik himself, there's no point in roya. Maybe it's along the lines of what you're saying. That, presuming so that is a separate inyan altogether, independent of the mitzvah of lighting. So the Gemara continues. Madlik mevorach shtayim v'roim vorach achas. The one who likes makes two brachas. The one who sees makes only one bracha. What's the bracha? Borach Hashem Kishon Zol Hadig Ne Chanukah. I behechet tzivanu. Where did Hashem tell us? From Loisasa. To Loisasa, like we read in Pasha Shefin, don't deviate to right or left. Follow them. So there's an Isa the Rabbanon. There's an Isa of Loisasa for every mitzvah of the Torah. Machlek is a Ramban and the Rambam whether it's really a mitzvah Torah to listen to the Rabbanon or this is a smach that's only mitzvah the Rabbanon to listen to Rabbanon. And Amnach Micha said there's a positive side. Possibly they're not arguing. And the difference is as follows. The first, there's two kinds of the Rabbanans. The Rabbanans were coming to augment the Torah, and the Rabbanans were conceiving a whole new concept. So for example, Chanukah licht. It's nothing to do with the Torah, it's a whole new mitzvah, except the Bahag who holds it's not Torah. But everyone holds it's only with the Rabbanan. So that's what Sha'ala V'chayetcha. Your father tells you some new things. But where the Chachamim are coming along with the Rabbanan and telling you we're giving muktzah to make sure that you don't, deviate from the Torah, to safeguard the Torah, then it's from Loisasa. So they're both correct, depending what kind of the Rabbanan it is. Nachman by Yitzchak, you said,
Does the Gemara have exactly the same discussion with Megillah in Maseches Megillah about the bracha?
No.
Same?
No.
So why doesn't it? I mean, all these questions are exactly the same for Megillah. Where do we know?
No. So once we've established here, we also have Gemara Shabbos. Once we've established here where you know the bracha from, that's it. Then what do we call it? Then we don't have to say to repeat every time you have Mishnah Rabbanan. What do we do?
Which is an interesting because Chanukah came later than Megillah. So the Shaila should be first on Megillah. Once we know Megillah, then we'll know for Chanukah.
We have the same Gemara in Shabbos by Chanukah licht over there. The same Gemara here is there by Chanukah, and we have the right there. If you remember the Chov Gimel Amad Aleph, we have the same Gemara there about where do you learn out of Tzivanu. But once we've established it, you're not going to go to every Mishnah Rabbanan and say, so where do you know it from Tzivanu? This is it.
I just thought I'd mention because last night I learned a Maimer which discusses this very topic, and it discusses the Maila. Why do we say Chvivin Divrei Sofrim and Chmurim Divrei Sofrim? Is because the mitzvahs that are bonon have in them both aspects of the mitzvahs asay and lois asay, based on this lois osur, that the mile of the mitzvahs lois asay is a grenetz the licht. This oireli key that it's mamshich is not malubish in a particular keli. When you do a mitzvahs asay, that oir is malubish in a particular keli. The lulav is a particular oir. The esrog, the vihais, the mezuzah, whatever mitzvahs asay you do is a particular oir that's mugbal into that keli. And a lois asay is mamshich oir, which is not mugbal b'kelim. And when you keep a drabanon, a mitzvah drabanon has both an asay and a lois asay aspect, that your mamshich oir, which is not mugbal b'keli, and you bring it into olam hazeh dafke because of this klolistic lois asay of lois sosur, but that applies to all drabanon. Sorry, just thought I'd mention that because I happened to learn that Maimah yesterday.
Nice. Okay. I mean, this is a beginning, and we covered parts of it in other parts of the Gemara and Brachas. But yeah, you say you learn from Chanukah licht. I'll tell you, I'm gonna have kol shiva mitzvah lulav. Lulav, you make a bracha every day. When you make a sukkah, you make a shechiyanu. Nichnes leish, but you're going to make a shechiyanu, you make a sukkah. What happened to sukkah was already built up. If you can be mechadish something, if it's built up already within 30 days, before 30 days. If you can mechadish something, pick up the schach and put it back down the varach, then you make a shechiyanu then. Only then do you make two when you sit down. So what happens if it seems from here, if it says here, if you didn't or able to mechadish when you go in the sukkah, you make kiddush, you make two brachas. You make leish sukkah, you make shechiyanu. Is mashma what happens if you made a shechiyanu when you built the sukkah? You don't make a shechiyanu again by kiddush. Now why not? There's two reasons why I make shechiyanu by sukkah. One is for the sukkah itself, the mitzvah of sukkah, and one is for the yom tov. So even though you made a 2 weeks ago, you built the sukkah, you made shechiyanu, why don't you repeat the shechiyanu in my kiddush? So Taisus hold that because the shechiyanu, because sukkah is being built for sukkahs, is as if sukkahs already began from when you built the sukkah. The shechiyanu on the sukkah also covers the yom tov. Other Rishayin disagree, and they say that no, the shechiyanu, even if you made the shechiyanu on the sukkah, you still need to make a shechiyanu on the day. And there's a big machlekes regarding the second night. If you look in different Sidurim, you'll see in the Lubavitch Siddur, the second night we say Shechianu, what do you call it? We say Shechianu first and then Leisha Basukah, the second night. First night we make Leisha Basukah, then Shechianu. So Shechianu goes on both, goes on the Yom Tov and on the Sukkah. But on the second night we make Shechianu first and then Leisha Basukah. The Shechianu does not go on the Leisha Basukah, like it says in most portions. Now, why not? Because you already made it yesterday. But according to those Rishonim that say the Sriva Taisus hold that if you made a Shechianu and you build a Sukkah, you still have to make another Shechianu by Kiddush. So the second night, we're not sure if it's the first night or not. We should make a Shechianu at the end. And, Leisha Sukkah and Shechianu, cover the Sukkah as well. So, and that's why they hold you make Shechianu at the end. If you follow the opinion of Taisus that the Sukkah, even if yesterday wasn't Yom Tov, and you make Shechianu a day earlier, it's good enough because the Sukkah is connected to the Yom Tov. Then the Shechianu on the second night is only on the Yom Tov and not on the Sukkah, so therefore you make Shechianu first and then Leisha Basukah. Says more further. This is what we do today. He made all these brachas on the Kiddush, Shechianu and everything else. He always made it on the Kiddush. Turban learned how you live fun of mitzvahs. However, you had in front of you a number of mitzvahs. You make, says Rabbi Yehuda. What bracha? If you have a number of mitzvahs to do right now, instead of making a bracha for each individual mitzvah, you say Baruch Hashem Kiddushan Mitzvahs V'Tzivanu Al HaMitzvahs. Now this Rashi here is very important because it generated a very big controversy. Rashi on this little piece of Gemara says right here. I'll just quote you what Rashi says. What do you mean mitzvahs harba? 5 lines on the bottom. For example, little lulav. You're going to take a lulav. Leisha basukah, you're also sitting in the sukkah. Lahaniach tefillin, you're putting on tefillin. You have 4 mitzvahs. Now we're talking about chalamoid, and Rashi clearly says you're putting on tefillin. So they use this Rashi to say you should put on tefillin on chalamoid. Others say there's no proof of this Rashi at all. Rashi is giving you 2 different examples. One example is little lulav leisha basukah, kama. Another example is stam during the year. Lahaniach tefillin l's'at b'tzitzis. So Rabbi Yehuda says you make one bracha al mitzvah al mitzvahs, and Rabbi Yehuda oimer. Sorry, that's what the Tanna Kama says. Rabbi Yehuda says nevorach al kol achas be'achas b'fnei. Every mitzvah has their own thing. Susan already explains that they're arguing what is the main purpose of a mitzvah, the common denominator of all the mitzvahs, or the individuality of each mitzvah. The common denominator is that we're doing the ratzon of Hashem. And then the specific is each one has a different way of fulfilling that ratzon. So when we doing mitzvahs, is the emphasis on the common denominator? Then you make bracha ala mitzvahs. If the emphasis is on what differentiates one mitzvah from the next, then you have to highlight what that mitzvah is and make a bracha on that mitzvah. And that's why some say oisig mitzvah pater mitzvah is not because you're pater from the mitzvah. If you follow the first view that all the mitzvahs are really one, the reason why pater is because you're doing the other mitzvah. It doesn't matter what mitzvah you're doing. The whole purpose is to fulfill the ratzon of Hashem, and you're doing that. So it's as if you did all the mitzvahs, whatever mitzvahs have to come by your way, all at the same time. My time Rabbi Yehuda, what's the svara? It says in pasuk, Baruch Hashem yom yom. You should bench the Eibush every single day, and we darshan. What does it mean? Only bench it by day. Every day bench, give a bracha according to the needs of that particular day. So on Shabbos you make bracha similar to Shabbos. A weekday similar to weekday. Yom Tov. So same with mitzvah. Every mitzvah should have its own bracha. Every mitzvah has its own bracha. Come and see. How Hashem is so different than my people. Done by a person, and if you're empty. If an empty vessel, machzik, you can fill it up. Mole, if the vessel is full, ain't a machzik, you can't fill it up anymore. Avom midas hakadosh baruch hu by the Eibishter. Mole, if you're full of Torah and machzik, you have room for more. Reika, if you're empty of Torah, then ain't a machzik, you have no room for anything because you're not really interested. Shneimar says, if you already got used to learning and everything else, then tishma, you'll hear new things and you can learn more. And im shamaya tishma, blah blah tishma. Otherwise, it won't last. And Rashi learns actually, if you learned when you were young, then you will be able to succeed and learn the rest of your life. But if you didn't learn when you're younger, then it'll be harder to learn when you get older. That's how Rashi learns. Interesting. Another pshat is im shamoya biyoshan. If you chazer again, you're here again, even though you heard it once before, you don't mind hearing it again, so you should penetrate more and you should be able to remember it, then good tishma, b'chadash. Then you will then see always new things, even though you heard this very same, you learned this very same Gemara 7 years ago. or a year ago. If you learn it again with the Chumash and Rashi every year, yet every time you learn it, you always see new nuances. You see new things that you didn't notice before. But the im yefanu lebavach, that you say, oh, I learned it already. What do I have to chaz it for? Shuv like tishma. Then you will no longer learn anything new from it, and you'll never grow in stature. Miyad Tanaikas, the Mishnah says we take from kids. We had a machlekes Rashi Teisa Halam Shat the Gemara. Rashi said Miyad Tanaikas means. Rashi said Miyad Tanaikas means that that the adults take from the kids their lulav and esrog, and Teisa said Miyad Tanaikas means Miyad straight away Tanaikas. The kids themselves take it off. And I think I told you yesterday that Rashi brings a beautiful medrash, a story about a guy. I can't remember if I told you yesterday or not. A guy wanted to give tzedakah. And he gave, obviously he wasn't very rich at all. He gave some of his money, and his wife was fuming why he did it. So he ran away from home. He had nowhere to go. He's wandering about, and came to Shana Rabbah, and he saw these kids, with their esrogim. So he went and he took the esrog, and the Medrash says, like the Mishnah says, that the adults would take from the kids the esrog. And then he ended up somehow on a ship, and he was traveling somewhere. He came to a kingdom where the king was very, very sick, and the only thing that was curing him was an esrog that was used for a mitzvah on Sukkot. So he had his esrog, he nominated an exorbitant sum, and he came back home a very wealthy man, and obviously he was shalom bayis all over again. So Rashi uses that as a proof that the Mishnah is talking about adults taking from kids. Tosfos didn't have that part of Rashi. Some people say Rashi never wrote it, but there's another medrash with the same story. In there, the medrash is exactly the opposite. He went into a kid's playground and he saw the kids were playing with their own esrogim, like the Mishnah says that kids would play with their esrogim on the seventh day, and he took that esrog. So, so I guess there's no right for the medrash because the two different versions of the medrash. Anyway, I'm going to make an esrog b'shvi. Also, esrog, the entire seventh day, even after you did the mitzvah, still muktzah because you set it aside for mitzvah. But b'shvi mutter, because shmini atzeres is mutter. It's no longer mitzvah of lulav and esrog, so it's mutter. Sukkah, but I feel b'shmini surah. Even though shmini atzeres is no sukkah, but we'll soon see sukkah is asa because bein hashmoshes. If you wanted to eat a meal, you still have to sit in the sukkah. But lulav and esrog, once you did it once in the morning, it's over. But Rish Lakish says esrog, I feel b'shvi nami mutter. Rish Lakish holds us esrog. Once you did the mitzvah, he only said it's only muktzah for the mitzvah. Once the mitzvah is done, it's no longer muktzah. The Ma'ik Mifugi Ma'asav the mitzvah. It's katzay became muktzah because of the mitzvah. Ma'asav, the other one says the kula yoymes katzay. The other one says it became muktzah for the day, for the yom tov. It says in the Mishnah, Miyad Tenoikas Shaimtin Es Luvens. Like Rashi says that the adults would go to the kids and take the lulavim. Tosfos asks, what in the world would the adults do with these lulavim? What do they need lulavim for? The oichlin, again, I understand this regim take away from the kids with the loving. What's for? Well, the men are going to play around with the loving and bang it against the wall. What do they need it for? That's why he learns talking about kids. Kids like to play with the sticks. My love, the same thing here. Who hadin legedolim? What's the difference taking the kids or taking their own? So as he clears them here, that's not muktzah anymore. Once you did your mitzvah, it's no longer muktzah. So Rabbi Yechon answers back. Well, no, tinoik is dafka. The adults only took the kids will love mesregim, but not their own. You can other say because it's muktzah for the whole day. And why kids are mutter? Because it was never really muktzah in the first place. Rashi used the expression, it was never really for a mitzvah gemura. So the kids used to have their own lulav nesting, therefore it was never really a mitzvah gemura because kids don't really have a mitzvah of lulav. You can other say, Ace with Rabbi Yechon that's like a shame other way around. Rabbi Yechon asked a question. It says in the Mishnah clearly that only the kids' lulav nesting was permitted. Again, tonight getting their life, but only the kids, not from adults. So the Gemara, who are the Inafil Shlakish answers back. No difference. Using the kid luvinesig with adult luvinesig, with hiding tonight is urcha de milsik tani. This is what happened. They used to take the kids. The adults would not do that to their own, but the kids they would. Why is esig only forbidden the Sabbath day? But mutter and shmiyat said is it's not muktzah anymore. Why sukkah is still muktzah? Is a different amalei sukkah v'chazia lebein hashmoshes sukkah since it comes by twilight. If you wanted to sit in a sukkah, since the suffix maybe still daytime. The Israel if you want to eat a meal by you have to enter the sukkah and eat begava. Therefore, it's katzoy lebein hashmoshes. Remember, when it comes to muktzah, the criteria is whether during Bein Hashmoshes, the onset of Shabbos, was it removed from your mind? If it was, then the rest of Shabbos is also, the rest of Yom Tov is also. Same thing here. Since Bein Hashmoshes, you had to use the sukkah for a mitzvah, so it's still set aside for its mitzvah, so therefore it's also the entire 8th day. Well, Migil is Katzor, Bein Hashmoshes, is Katzor L'Kula Yom the Shmini. Since it was Muktzah Bein Hashmoshes of the 8th day, it's Muktzah the entire 8th day. But Esek, But esig, which is not suitable for ben hashmoshes, leis katzor ben hashmoshes. Therefore, once you did the mitzvah, there's no longer a need for it. So therefore, since it came ben hashmoshes, there wasn't muktzah for the mitzvah. Is leis katzor l'kula yomim l'shmini. Therefore, it does not become muktzah for the 8th day. But not everyone agrees, because Levi says esig also afila b'shmini aser. Levi holds it's also. You know why? The fact is, the entire 7th day it's aser, right, including bein hashmoshes because it's muktzah the whole day. The fact that bein hashmoshes is aser, true, not because you might, if you want to do the mitzvah, there's no mitzvah, but because bein hashmoshes is part of the 7th day, so therefore it's aser bein hashmoshes as part of the 7th day. So now it's also aser on the 8th day because bein hashmoshes going into the 8th day, you couldn't. It was still part of the mitzvah. The Avua de Shmuel Amar, but the father of Shmuel disagrees. He says, Esig b'shvi, asa b'shvi mutter. He holds esig in the 7th is asa, but the 8th days mutter. Since the reason why ben hashmoshes is asa, not because of itself, is because maybe it's part of the 7th day, and therefore that in itself tells you, but not because it's part of the 8th day, and that's why. So therefore, it doesn't asa for the 8th day. Different than sukkah. That sukkah right now it's asa if you want to eat, you have to sit in the sukkah, so it's a mitzvah. Come up with the Shmuel. Levi changed his mind and agreed with Levi. Levi was machmer like Levi that a esek is also a day. Come, Rab Zera b'shitosid Avur Shmuel. Rab Zera then stood up and he said, "I follow the first Avur Shmuel that an esek is over on the 7th day, doesn't go any further." Nevertheless, it's also the entire 7 days, but not the 8th day. Clearly, he said it's not also the 8th day, only also the 7th day. 7 days. So Rab Zera agrees with this whole Gemara we just learned right now, and therefore only a kid's esek can be taken, and not an adult esek. Rab Zera, let me teach you a few dinim. You had asked me if a kid's esek, if he holds like Levi, then he holds like Rabbi Yechon that the 7 days asa, and the Mishnah says clearly that you can use the kids on the 7th day. That's talking about a kid's lulav and esek. So the question is. That means the only way you can understand the Mishnah is the kid must have had his own lulav and esrog. If the kid uses his father lulav and esrog, then what's the difference, adult with the kids? Must be the kid had his own lulav and esrog. Says Rab Zera, if the kid has his own lulav and esrog, why would you give a kid his own lulav and esrog? I mean, that's a big expense. Why isn't such a mitzvah of a kid having his own lulav and esrog? So Zera explains. This is the segue to the next two pieces of Gemara. I think he said, you want to know why a kid has his own lulav and esrog? Because we have a conundrum here. The first day of Sukkot, or the first 2 days in Chutzlar, how does a kid go ahead and do the mitzvah of lulav and esrog? How does he do the mitzvah of lulav and esrog? If the kid does not have his own lulav and esrog, what do? You cannot give it to the kid, lend him the kid, because the kid cannot. You cannot give it to the kid on the first day and say, okay, use it and then give it back to me. Because the kid cannot. He'll be koine, but it cannot be makna. So what do? So some of the Rishonim say you hold on the lulav while the kid is benching the lulav. So you never really gave it to him. No, so if so, Hitaka wasn't really yaitz to the mitzvah. We're just going through the motions. Others say you give it to him, and so how can he give it back to you? Since he cannot give it back to you, like the Rosh says, that means he never gave it to him in the first place because it's conditional. Therefore, it was never really his. So therefore, I don't lose out. Again, so he wasn't really yaitz. We're going through the machinations. But Rab Zera holds, I hold that chinuch means you have to do it exactly the way an adult does it, like the Prima Governor explains. So therefore, Rab Zera says there's only one bereda, one solution. Give it to the kid for keeps. So that's why Rab Zera is saying, you want to know how in the Mishnah we have a case of a kid's lulav and esrog, you're allowed to, after the mitzvah is done, you're allowed to use it and eat and so on and so forth, because the kid used to have their own lulav and esrog because we had no bereda. And all the other ruses that they use, like some people say, Matan Luzman, give it to the kid for 10 minutes, then automatically becomes mine. Others hold you cannot do a Matan Luzman. Matan Luzman is no different than borrowing. A Matan Luzman means you don't really own it, you just use it for 10 minutes. So that's not owning, that's borrowing, that's lending. So anyway, so the Avdei says that's pshat. So my time you can acquire it, but you cannot give it back. It's not his lulav. That's why Rabbi Yechanan is right. The pshat in the Mishnah is only by kids, and they have their own lulav. Now, you're going to ask me a question. What's the big deal? Why can't you follow all these other opinions of saying who says, you just give it to the kid, and the kid thinks it's his, but really it's not his because it's really only a shoyel. You're lending it to him because it cannot really be in between and all that. Just what's the difference? So he said, I'll tell you why. Because you cannot tell a kid, I'm giving it, you cannot lie to a kid or deceive a kid. Because if you deceive a kid, as he grows up, he'll become himself dishonest. Should also like you're teaching a kid how to lie and to be a conniving person. Because it says, Limdu l'shoinim, you should teach them, daber sheker, you're going to teach them to say false. So Rav Zayda is explaining his opinion, because I hold that the chinuch has to be real. It has to be just like an adult. Cannot mislead a kid. And therefore, and since you cannot give a kid a lulav and then take it back, must have their own lulav and esek. So now we can understand the Mishnah. We can understand the Mishnah. The kid has his own lulav and esek, and therefore his lulav and esek you can use on the seventh day. But everybody else's, you got to wait till the Shmini Atzeres before you can touch it or use it, because the seventh day is muktzah. And maybe that is the segue of these Gemaras here. Studying more further, and in fact, this is the argument of Rish Lakish. We learned this argument about whether it's the esek is usher after the mitzvah or for the day. It's the same argument that Rish Lakish had. We learn what happens if hifrish shivas regim. Every day you had a set aside 7 regim for the entire Yom Tov, each esek for a day. Every single one you eat, so you finish it, you can eat it, because he holds it's only muktzah for the mitzvah. Ravasi says, Ravasi says every single one you can be yaitze and eat it the next day. Why does Ravasi say that? Because Ravasi holds it's muktzah for the day, so therefore for that day is also, but for the next day it's already mutter. But my argument, one of them holds that for the mitzvah, the mitzvah Rav says it's mutter. And the other one says it's also for the entire day. Therefore, you have to wait till tomorrow. We have 2 days. What do we do? Abai says we have 2 days. What do we do? So he says here, it's our Shmini Atzeres is a suffix sukkos. This Gemara is talking about here in Eretz Yisrael. So Shmini Atzeres is definitely not sukkos anymore. But the Shmini Atzeres, we still said in the sukkah, as we'll discuss right now. So what do we do? So Abai says Shmini is suffix shvi. So Shmini Atzeres today it's still aser. It's muktzah the esek because maybe it's Hoshana Rabbah. But she suffix shmini mutter. But Simchas Torah definitely it's either Shmini Atzeres or it's nothing. Therefore, the esek is not aser anymore. Mereima says afilu Shmini suffix shvi mutter. Mereima says that even Shmini Atzeres it is mutter. It is mutter. Besuda and Suda Abdi Kimerem, because all things are Rabban anyway, it's muktzah, so therefore, and the suffix we're Baki Kriyach is on Rabban, so we're lenient on Shmini Atzeres, even by us Chutzlaritz, we say that the esrog is on muktzah. Besuda Abdi Kimerem, and they were lenient like Meremer, Rav Sheisha Bereya, the Rav Didi Ovid Kabaya, he followed Abaya that Shmini Atzeres it's also V'hichas Kabaya. The law is like Abaya. Amar Rav Yehuda. Maybe we'll stop here. We start the new Gemara tomorrow, talking about Shmini Atzeres.